community. So this is a really big new event for us, Dreamscape Weekend. And we're going to have 3 world premieres. The first piece, well, I think, do you want to announce your own work? Its first piece is going to be by Kenneth, Frazelle, and then we're going to have Chee and Catarina Domenici. And before each piece is performed, the composers will say a few words, not weeks, but words, to give you some context. I hope you brought your iPads or whatever you look at music on so that you can watch the scores if you want to, or just get an impression. So I hope this will be a great experience for all of us, like open all kinds of windows. And after this is over, which will be about an hour, we're going to have a teeny tiny pause to take a few pictures, and anybody that isn't a participant here or a faculty person will need to leave, because the next part, which is just for us, the faculty forum, where we will kind of take it, as they now say, a deeper dive into creativity. Okay, so let's welcome Kenneth Frazelle.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I wanted to say I was going to say a few notes, but it's a few words about this piece called Notes for Him. And I've written all kinds of pieces inspired by many different things, inspired by folk music, inspired by nature, etc., etc. Some pieces are more abstract and really aren't consciously inspired by anybody or anything. But this piece is actually very personal. About a year ago, I lost my life partner. We'd been together for 40 years. And the music that came after his death was very mournful, some pieces for viola and piano. And then I kind of moved toward a more positive way of thinking about just how grateful I was to my friends who'd gotten me through a really hard time. And a very special friend, him, in the title, brought me a lot of joy and comfort and fun, and he's been a really good friend, and I feel very lucky to have the support of so many friends and relatives in a difficult time. So the first piece has kind of a lulling quality, and a couple of the pieces you'll hear after that are actually kind of fun. One's about laughter, and then there are 2 pieces that are very spacious and more contemplative and just trying to strive towards some kind of peaceful sustenance. So a lot of different kinds of characters, and I'm thrilled to be here, and I've only heard myself play it, so it's going to be up from there. Thank you.
I just want to say I'm so pleased that Naashá can do the world premiere of this piece.
Chee, Chee, and Shit, Bilagana Nashlik, Yani Bashichin, do Bilagana Dashache, Zizana Dashanella. My name is Chee, and that is our traditional Navajo introduction, which translates as I am Italian on my mother's side, born for the Towering House clan. My maternal grandfather was Italian, and my paternal grandfather is the Many Goats clan. We always introduce ourselves that way when we meet new people to see how we might be related. I'm going to play just a few short pieces, obviously the piece that was commissioned for the festival, and a couple other short pieces to sort of give context to what I do as a composer and a little more context to the piece. So the first thing that I'll play is a short piece from a collection that I titled Vocables, Navajo Vocables for Piano. And this is based on a traditional corn grinding song. Traditionally, the corn grinding songs not only accompanied the task of grinding corn, but sometimes it would tell a short story or add some levity to the task. And the repetitions in these themes sort of will signify that it is a corn grinding song. And so this is something that I took that was a traditional song, and I did my own arrangement and setting in a composition. Composing, it was sort of not a path I intended to take. So I originally took these songs and started setting them and creating arrangements. And as I continued further down the path of being a composer, I started creating pieces that were also based on elements of the culture and relationship to land and place. And so the next piece I'll play is about land. It's about the elements. It is about rain. In Navajo, or Diné, as we call ourselves, in Diné culture, we believe in two types of rain. The male rain, which is the downpours like we had this morning, or if there's thunder and lightning, And there's also female rain, which we call Nutsapaad. The female rain is just a gentle sprinkling that sort of soaks the earth and gives light to the plants and the animals, which is my favorite kind of rain. So this is female rain. So now I'll play the piece that I wrote with the festival in mind. Naashá, or Naashá, it's sometimes pronounced. And this is a piece that explores both a traditional song and a connection to the land. So some context about the song that it's based on. It came from a period in Navajo history known as the Long Walk. Back in 1864, the United States government rounded up all the Navajo people and forcibly marched them some 350, 400 miles to a prison camp in New Mexico, where they were imprisoned for 4 years. Many people died along the way. It was a very tragic event. Many people died in the camp from malnutrition and other things. In 1868, eventually the Navajo Nation was able to negotiate a treaty for the release of the people. So they released them from Bosque Redondo, Fort Sumner in New Mexico. So they were free to make the long walk back to the Navajo Nation, which was another very tragic event where a lot of people passed. But this song, Naashá, was written and sang back in 1868. So in the Navajo Nation, we have 4 sacred mountains that delineate the border of our sacred lands. And one of those mountains is in New Mexico. It's Mount Taylor, which we call Tzotzil. And on the long walk back home to the Navajo Nation, it was when they finally saw Tzotzit, the sacred mountain, that they knew they were almost home. And it sort of gave them enough energy to complete the trip. And so the song is really about walking to freedom. Naashá means I'm walking. And I'm walking back to freedom, back to the sacred land where we're supposed to be. And so it's a joyful song with a very tragic backstory. And so in this piece, I did a setting of the song, and as I also took some quotation from some other music that I've written specifically for Mount Taylor, for Tzotzit, our sacred mountain of the South. And so that's sort of the context of this piece and where it originated and was passed down orally for generations.
Catarina Domenici, and like Connor, I'm Brazilian, but I'm part Italian, part Portuguese, part African. So the tunes that I submitted to the festival are para Beatriz, that's to Beatriz. But who is Beatriz? Beatriz is Beatriz Balzi, a pianist who was my teacher in the undergraduate course in Brazil. She's from Argentina. She moved to Brazil back in the 1950s, and she was a student of Vincenzo Scaramuzza, a famous Argentinian pedagogue, who was the teacher of Marta Argerich, and also she was a student of Alberto Ginastera. She studied composition with him. And Beatriz introduced me to the Latin American piano repertoire. She was a champion of the Latin American piano repertoire. She recorded 7 CDs in her short life because she died prematurely in 2001. And I composed, this piece is a part of a larger collection called Ciranda das Mestras, which is available on Spotify, by the way. It's a series of pieces dedicated, and this is just a volume 1, right? Because there are so many important women in my life. And at a very crucial moment when I decided to embrace composition in 2015, during a very serious crisis, like you are on the edge of the precipice, and you choose to either die or live. So what kept me alive was just embracing composition. And during that crisis, I imagined all the women in my life who had embraced me, cared for me, taught me, and just giving hands. So this image of the ciranda, which is a immaterial patrimony of Brazil, which is a very democratic dance, and it's music and dance. They just hold hands together and then nessa ciranda não estou só, eu vou com Lia de Tamaracá. Just dance and on the beach. So I imagine the ciranda made by these women, and Beatriz is one of them. Rebecca, Miss Benny's, is volume 2. It's very hard to capture her music. She's a very rich personality, amazing visionary, one-of-a-kind woman. So this is for Beatriz, and you're going to see that there is a quotation of Ginastera's first piano sonata in the middle of the piece. And there is a section called Triste, which is sad. And it's this. So I imagine this bombo leguero, which is an instrument from Uruguay and Argentina, the folk music. Bom. Just this telluric energy, like the beating heart of Beatriz, and the sadness of her early departure. that is to spin around and around oneself. So I got this idea to write this piece based on, there is a kinesthetic component to it, which is the left hand, right? It's just the arm going around in itself, right? And then there is the harmony, which it begins in D, and then it goes to B minor, and then F sharp minor, and back to D. So it is a journey that is kind of takes you from point A back to point A, not from point A to point B, but you were kind of transformed in an altered state of consciousness by just spinning around. So this is Rodopio. And of course, there is a lot of influence from Brazilian popular music and jazz as well.
Why did you enjoy it?
Because there was such good music.
Yeah. You, Jameson, what did you think?
I think there are different approaches with different combinations of colors, harmonies,
glad to hear that. I did too. I mean, so where should we start? Maybe we can start by, one question I was thinking about asking you is, why are you all here? Why did you all come to this festival? Do I have to go? Do I have to? Would you like to answer?
Point finger.
To experience many kinds of like thoughts from professors and also like listen.
Yeah, I think the key word is experience, isn't it? I mean, you know, so I can say to you, Eric, why do you play the piano?
To express myself.
Yeah, and how did you get started? I mean, what happened? Did you just sort of wake up one day and there was a piano on the street and you ran over and started to play it? Or, I mean, did you have like a piano in your house, or did you hear some, you know, how did you fall in love with piano?
I remember listening to the Chopin Second Scherzo when I was younger, and I didn't know what the name of the piece was, and when I got older, I had learned, or I guess I had heard it again, and I really wanted to find, you know, what is this piece of music that...
Yes, so you got infected. Chopin infected you, right? With his beauty somehow. So I think everybody has a story like that, no? Does everybody remember the first piece they played that they really loved? What was that? What is that? Yes? No?
I can't remember. You know, like the first couple of years of my piano experience is like a child. You know, when a child is like small, they can't remember anything. That's the way with my piano thing. You know, I can't remember the first couple of years of my piano.
Some people can remember their very first piece. I can't remember mine. So anyway, I mean, I think, you know, I'm hoping that you all really love this music. And I hope that, you know, whether you decide to play it or not, there's just a world of beauty. And not only by, you know, dead people, but here are three, you know, just people. So I'm hoping that we can start maybe with either whoever, but, well, Connor, why don't we start with you? I mean, how did you know, I mean, I can say that Connor had a, you know, really very good traditional training, right? I don't know how you got involved in piano anyway. Why don't you say that?
You know, I started with piano. You know, my parents had some of those compilation albums of like best of classical music, you know, and so I latched onto that for whatever reason. And my dad got for Christmas one year like a little tiny keyboard, and I don't know why, because neither of my parents were musical. But I think I was like 5 and I was really drawn to it. I was really excited about it. And so eventually my parents saw that I was interested, so they got me lessons, which was difficult where I was at, because it was middle of nowhere, Arizona. I mean, that's how I first started with my interest with piano, was kind of playing by ear and making up my own things, and eventually getting lessons on this tiny little thing. Eventually I got a real piano, which I still have today. But yeah, that's how that was when I first got infected.
And then what happened? You went to music school?
Yeah, well, you know, I think I had to make a decision pretty early on of how serious I was going to be with music, because there were no resources for music out where I was at or on the Navajo Nation. So I think I was, you know, 8 years old, and there was like one piano teacher in my town, and after a little bit they were like, well, that's all I know, so, you know,
Bye.
that's it. So my parents were having to drive me 2 hours to Flagstaff, Arizona for a piano lesson every weekend, and then 2 hours home. And so when I was 10, they asked, like, hey, are you really serious about this? Because, you know, we have to move somewhere else where they have real music school. And my mom was originally from Cincinnati, and so I auditioned for the performing arts school they have in Cincinnati when I was 10, and I got accepted, and that was sort of the moment where they're like, hey, you gotta be serious, because my parents gave up their lives, they gave up their jobs, for me to be able to study music. So I had to make that decision when I was 10 that I was gonna follow through with this, no matter what, in some iteration of music, I was dedicated. So, you know, that was I think the turning point as far as taking it as a career choice and studying that in, you know, school and eventually college and master's degree. But.
And then how did you get from, well, so Connor was a student at Eastman, he was in my studio, and then he went out of my studio, you know, left, graduated, and then well, why don't you tell a little bit about how you got into, what happened, because you were not, I mean, if you were going to be composing rather than playing, I thought you were going to do both, but, you know, that was a long time ago, so.
You know, I had, when I was, my first experience with music, at least on the keyboard, was composing, writing my own stuff. And there was a point where I was discouraged from that, because they basically, I had teachers that said, you don't know enough about music theory, you don't know about composition, you have to know about form and all of this stuff. And I just thought, I'm not good enough. So I kind of just didn't touch it for a long time. So I was a performance major, and I took composition classes for my own edification when I had electives to fill. It was always in composition, you know, private lessons or whatever. Never really considered myself going somewhere as a composer. But, you know, in my studies at Eastman and at CCM, you know, I was searching for my place, and I was deeply unhappy, and I didn't know why. And it took a while to find where I feel like I was supposed to be, you know. And it was a long, twisty, windy road to figure out, you know, where I'm at today. And it really started with reconnecting with myself after I finished my master's. I was going to go for a DMA, but then I was kind of like, you know, what's the point? Why? And I had the, you know, I think, you know, when I was at Chautauqua in the music festival, you know, when the roles were reversed and I was there and somebody asked, why are you here? I probably couldn't have answered either. Because I think we get into these habits of we're just going through the motions, this is what's expected, and it's kind of a whirlwind, and you don't stop to think, why am I here? You know?
It's also, you know, I mean, one of the reasons we're doing this experiment is, you know, you don't find, well, I've talked to all of you about finding your own voice, and, you know, like your fingerprint is unique, and when you play, your sound should be unique, and your expression should be unique, whether you're playing a work by Chee or whoever, or Beethoven, has your imprint, right? And that's what we're all doing here, or that's what I'm doing here. I mean, why do we have this festival? To help you connect with yourselves more and make you able to just express yourselves and communicate your hopes and dreams. And I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that if the whole world were able to do that, we would have a much better world. We would have peace, we wouldn't have war, we would have more communication, right? But the reason for this particular weekend is that it's not an easy path. I think there's a lot of like, well, I don't know what to do, and how should I do this? And so, I mean, you know, I'm hoping that, I mean, you know, it's not, I'm too old. I mean, I don't even think it matters that I share my own pain and my own struggles, because I'm like, but these are people closer to your own age. Well, maybe Ken isn't, but he also had his own struggles. But everybody has this searching and this unrest. You know, it's a process, and you don't just wake up one morning and, oh wow,
No.
everything's hunky-dory. Do you know what I mean? So, it was clear when Connor was in my studio that he was in enormous pain. And it's not like we talked about that at all. We didn't talk about it much at all. But it was clear because, you know, you can tell by the hesitancy and the confusion, and you can tell when somebody is suffering. But nevertheless, he kept going. But, you know, I mean, I think that's a very, very important message. And my guess would be, even if you hadn't made that commitment to your parents, your talent would have, you know, because the love of music, and that's why it's important that you all remember when you were bitten by the piano mosquito, or however you want to, you know, describe it. So Kat, maybe you could tell a little of your story.
Mhm. So I'm originally from São Paulo State and the countryside of São Paulo State. I grew up in a very small town, around 5,000 inhabitants, and there was no piano in the city, but my father is a percussionist and a dentist. He had a Sunday school with his two brothers, and I was raised in a Sunday school. So my first learning, musical learning, was samba in this context of Carnival in Brazil. And I only found the piano when I was 12 years old, because my younger sister we moved to a larger town when I was 10, and my younger sister wanted to take piano lessons. And I was like, what is piano? I was always in love with languages. I wanted to learn every single language in the world. But my mother said, no, you were the older sister, you go and watch your younger sister. And was that first lesson. It's like the whole world imploded in that instrument, in that sound. And I was totally captivated. And there was nothing else more from that point on in my life. So much that when I finished high school, when I was 16, my mother asked me to go to med school, or dentistry school, or lawyer, or something. When I told her that I wanted to go and move to Tatuí to study at the conservatory and make music 24 hours, 7 days a week, to see if I had what it took to be a musician, she disowned me and expelled me from home. So from age 16, I had to start working, playing in dancing balls, getting scholarship from the conservatory, starving to death almost, and making my own clothes and making my own shoes sometimes, because I didn't have one penny. I was just very, very poor, struggling. But I put myself through college. Thank God in Brazil it's public education, so I got myself into public education, and I got a government scholarship to do my master's degree and my doctorate degree at Eastman School of Music. So I was always, playing a lot of contemporary music with a percussion ensemble during my undergraduate years, and playing with a jazz group during the night until 3 a.m. in school and everything else. So it was really, really hard. And where does composition fit into all this? Since my very first year studying with that private teacher in Itapetininga, and the same thing happened with Connor. It's like by the end of the year she said, I don't have anything else to teach you, you have to go to the Tatuí Conservatory. Then my mother enrolled us in the Tatuí Conservatory. But I was composing, improvising, and especially understanding what I played. There was no separation between theory and practice of music, right? So that was my very first shock when I went to the conservatory, that I saw that my piano colleagues tripped over a D minor chord, and they didn't know it was a D minor and what it was doing in C major or F major or whatever context that was, because there was such a separation between just playing and just knowing music. Why not together? It's music after all, right? But as a classically trained pianist in the conservatory, I noticed that we were not allowed to play by ear, to improvise, and to compose. And there was no composition course at the conservatory. So I kept composing, doing jazz and Brazilian popular music, and kind of gradually internalized these artificial frontiers that were created, basically the 19th century, right? between classical music, popular music, and then there is the little box of jazz, and the little box of folk, and the little box of contemporary music, and the little box of common practice repertory, or music antiga. You know, it's like, what are those little boxes? Who is gaining from it? And that was partially the crisis that hit me in 2015, when I realized that I was internally fragmented. I had all these facets that I had to claim, you know, the passability, you know, the concept of passability. When you're a mixed race like me, sometimes you can pass for white and sometimes you can pass for black. That was happening to me musically. So when I went to play a contemporary music concert, my bio reflected only the contemporary music facet. You know, when I was going to play Schubert, Beethoven, Chopin, it was another facet. And when I went to play my gigs with the popular music crowd or the jazz crowd, it was another bio completely different. I said, what the heck? It's the same body. It's me. It's me. So, and the way to integrate all these experiences, all these different facets, was composing and mixing it all up the way my creativity sees fit. So,
Interesting, right? So I think that if all of you reach into yourselves, you know, you have your own story and you have your own lifeline, right? And it's, you know, you may not realize it now. I'm not sure when you were in your early 20s or when you were, you know, like what the awareness that you now have wasn't quite there, but the struggle and the unhappiness, or I have to do something more, or I'm confused, or all of these symptoms, you know, of where to go next. I think you all are dealing with things like that because, well, first of all, nobody has a crystal ball, and nobody can predict, you know, where anybody is going to end up, period, right? So that's, I think these stories and struggles and breakthroughs are good for you to hear. Kenneth, would you like to?
A lot of similar themes we all have. My parents were both from tobacco farms in eastern North Carolina. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I was one generation removed. And they were definitely on the poor side. We lived very meagerly, but for some reason we had this little toy piano. I don't know how it got there. And my father was an innate musician. He could pick up instruments and figure out how to play the banjo or the harmonica or this toy piano. And when we were very young, we had this thing we called the miraculous game, which is really sort of like named that tune. And he would play stuff on the piano and we'd have to guess it. And it left a profound influence on me, the idea of just making music at home, but also the sound of the piano, even though it was a toy piano, was very intriguing to me. He died when I was very young. I was about 6 years old. And I think I connected to the piano as a way of holding on to his spirit in a way. And I began composing when I was 10 or 11. My mother, she was a single mom. She worked very hard so that us three siblings could go to get lessons. My sister took ballet and my brother took painting. And it was a real struggle, but she really believed in the importance of these things. And I began piano lessons, I think, in the 3rd grade, which is about when most kids did back then. Something you might find interesting, and fortunately it's not common anymore, but when I started piano in the 3rd grade, the idea of a male, a boy playing the piano was considered totally sissy. And it was very humiliating to me. I was dying to take piano lessons, but I knew that I wasn't supposed to. It was weird. And my mother kept asking me, do you want to take lessons? I said no, and she kept asking. She knew that I did. She said I would just cry when I said no. But she had a lot of mother's intuition and worked very hard to support us. And I worked hard at the piano. I sort of plateaued with a not so good teacher at some point, and my mother found another piano teacher, this woman who was extraordinary, country piano teacher, but she knew her stuff. And I actually cried after the first lesson because she said, you have this sorry left hand and you're over pedaling. And, has anybody ever heard that before? And
Everybody.
yeah, exactly. And she gave me the revolutionary etude to whip my left hand into shape. Anyway, this woman, her name was Gladys Sylvester, and she said, I can certainly help you with your piano, but I cannot help you with your composition. There's this new school in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where Miss Penny's taught. It was only 5 or 6 years old, and so the goal was to whip me into shape as a pianist to get into the school, which I did, and I majored in piano and composition, but it became very clear that composition was really where I wanted to spend my hours, although I'm very grateful to have the piano skills. And when it came time for, I went to that school when I was 15, and when it came time for college, I applied to a lot of music schools, and my main goal was I discovered this great American composer named Roger Sessions. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know if he was dead or alive, but I found out that he was very much alive, and he taught at Juilliard, and that's sort of the last place in the world that I thought I would end up. But he accepted me and they accepted me, so I had 4 really wonderful years in New York, and I played a lot of dance classes for money and gigs, and then I moved back to Winston-Salem after that, and I did not make a dime off of composition until I was 30. So don't get discouraged if the money doesn't come rolling in real fast. I supported myself teaching piano and playing bar mitzvahs and weddings and funerals and the whole thing. So it's good to have those piano skills, even if that might not be the main focus of your life. It's a great thing to have, and keeps you versatile. So I eventually started teaching at the School of the Arts, which is in a way sort of a punishment for all the sins that I'd committed there in my high school years. But I taught there for 34 years and resigned from there just a year ago, and I've devoted, it's great to have 100% of my time devoted to composition now. So
So can you, may I just say that you're also a painter? And can you talk a little about it? Can I show you?
sure.
So Ken is also a world-class painter.
Well.
Yes. And so how does that fit? When did you come to start doing these watercolors? Can you see this? If you go to his website, so how did, there's this, there's more.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, one of the reasons, so here's really, really, really beautiful. And nobody's asking for my opinion, but my opinion is anyway that your music sounds like you're painting. I mean,
I hope that's a good thing.
I would know it anywhere. This has that same imagery. So how did you start painting, and how does that fit in with your music?
Well, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I don't know, my partner, who I mentioned earlier, he was very intuitive, and he knew that I wanted to do watercolors, but I was too cheap to buy them. So he gave me a really nice set of watercolors for my birthday, and I felt like I had to paint. So
you never painted before then?
I did as a teenager, yeah. But I was always afraid of watercolors because they are very treacherous to, you have to think in reverse, like where's the white going to be? That's the paper showing through. You have to plan. It's very different from oil painting, which I find a lot easier actually. But
So do you paint and compose at the same time? I mean,
no, that's a good, well,
or do you go back and forth?
I used to go back and forth. I've tried now to keep both things going on at once. And yeah, I've actually had maybe 5 watercolor shows, and I consider myself an amateur, but my friends say, well, you made a lot of money selling them, so you're a professional. as if that is what defines professionalism, money. But
Yeah, that's a really good so how would you define, how do you define professionalism?
Mhm. Me?
Yeah.
Oh.
You brought it up.
Well, someone who didn't make a dime until he was 30, alpha composition, I don't know. It is a good question because I love the painting as much as composing.
Uh-huh.
And I don't have the same kind of stuff attached to painting. There aren't reviews. Of course there aren't reviews anywhere anymore, but I don't take it as seriously because it's not my career. It feels very freeing in a way to have the watercolors to kind of unwind with.
As you have more shows and you paint more,
That's true.
you
Yeah.
might find music more freeing. I mean, you don't, because you can see that it might shift, right?
It may, although I've got a commission for an opera, which is going to occupy several years, so that's sort of a fun thing to think about.
Any questions?
Get us while we're alive.
Yes.
I have a question for Mr. Frazelle. So you said that you didn't earn money on music until the
On
30s,
composition.
Until the 30s, and then you started teaching at the school. But how did the composition career kind of launch from that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Kind of word of mouth. There was a pianist at Juilliard named Jeffrey Kahane, name you may know of. We were barely acquaintances, but I think it was I would have been in my early 30s. He told a friend of mine that he was looking for a young composer to champion, and we were exactly the same age. And he had an immediate response to my music and started getting it out there. He premiered about 17 pieces of mine over the years.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it really helps to have advocates. I mean, we cannot do this alone. And as performers, composers, and listeners, we need each other. So don't be stingy. Be generous and help each other out. That's one of the most wonderful things about this, I think, is we are a community. We're a very limited, rarefied strata of the population, and we all want the best for each other. So I'm very grateful to so many people that have helped me along the way. Yeah. So that's the things, just sort of, like you've seen these family tree genealogy pictures maybe of things that just keep branching out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how things happen. And
That's true.
yeah.
Anybody else? Yes.
So I touched composition maybe like 10 years ago or something like that. I had like a mild interest in it because my brother was also he was really into composing. He was kind of like a nerd, so he was like really into the classical forms and everything like that. So I tried it a little bit, and I didn't really love doing some of it. But I found that after I had maybe one or two of my main ideas out, the rest of it was kind of I was just trying to fill the rest of it in rather than it being really inspiring. So I was just wondering, if I were to, or if somebody were to want to compose something, how to keep keep an entire piece meaningful rather than just having one or two good ideas and the rest of it is just kind of filled.
That's one great question.
It is.
It's a great question. I think it depends. Why am I saying it depends? I married for 30 years to a composer who's a composition professor, right, at a university. When we first met, he told me, "You were a composer." And I said, "No way, Jose, I'm not a composer." So as we lived our daily lives together, and I saw his thinking about composition, his way of composing, and I said even more firmly, I'm not a composer because I don't think about composition like you do. You have another style of doing your thing, right? So that's why I say it depends. It depends how, and that's why it's so important to be true to yourself, to be true to your voice and your own imagination, because you really, of course, there is the technical part that you need to have, right? Technique is just a tool, but that is used towards an end, right? So how you use it is part of who you are. I don't know if I did answer your question, but that's the best I can do. Because, you know, I'm married to a composer who thinks composition entirely different from myself. Like,
Do you have anything to add or say? It's difficult.
I think for myself, I have to find places to be inspired. And if I hit a block where I feel like I'm just creating filler, I think it's a red flag for me that I'm not inspired. I've been spending too much time in my studio or in the practice room, and I need to do something. And it could be totally unexpected, but your life experiences are what create you. And so sometimes it's a sign for me if I'm stuck or if something doesn't feel right. I might have a piece that I put away and I'll come back to it. Or I have to, you know, reevaluate what the problem is and find that inspiration, whether it's through listening to other people or music or being in nature or, you know, collaborating with other people. That I've done many different genres, everything from like hip hop to metal bands or something. I mean, you switch it up, and then those are the moments when I have like an aha after I get back. And it's like, I think it's the same for practicing a piece. If I'm not inspired or it's feeling flat or there's no dimension to, you know, the music that I'm learning, if it's someone else's music, then I have to do something in my life that might not be immediately obvious that it's a musical thing, but, you know, just living your life is the music. So that's
It's
for
really
me.
a great
Yeah.
image. Living your
Yeah.
life is the music.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
That's true.
Yeah, and I also feel that the kind of this, how do you say? It's kind of false pressure on originality, you know, that you must be original. Like the most original people stole from other people. We never, human beings never find something by themselves and for themselves. We live as a society, as a community. We learn from each other. We learn to walk, to talk, to play from each other. So we just grab ideas and put it through our own beings, our own perception, and give it back to the community. So I think just the pressure of, I really need to come up with something really original, you end up risking rediscovering the wheel. You know, it's like, oh, look at this, it's a beautiful wheel. Okay.
I think what your question, I mean, you're really hitting like the essential difficulty of composition, which is what do you do with an idea and how do you sustain it? And there's so many parallels. I mean, I tell my students, look at other pieces, see how Schubert extended a sonata movement for 20 minutes, or look at a Chopin prelude that's 1 minute long. Like, and a lot of it is craft, is learning to see how other people developed their ideas. And if you were a carpenter, you wouldn't just go chop down some wood and say, I know how to make a table. You would look at other tables and see which tables have lasted and why. You know, so a lot of it is inspirational, but a lot of it is craft too. You know, your first piano piece wasn't the B minor sonata of Chopin, probably. If it was, congratulations. But after a year, I might have played the A major little mazurka prelude. I don't know, but you know, you learn to build over a long period of time. So don't be impatient. Maybe it would be good to just write some small pieces. I mean, some of the greatest music is the shortest.
And that's not to say that you all have to compose. It's to say that you need to just open your heart and open your imagination and open all the sensitivity that you have to anything you come into contact with. I mean, it could be that you love to dance, or you love to garden, or you love to paint, or you love I mean, I know that all of you love more than one thing, and it could be that piano is my big love, but there are other things, and switching from one thing that you love to another really will help you stay in love every day, so every day becomes a joy and a gift. Any other questions? Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Either one.
Okay, as you all started with piano, what was the point when you felt like you want to have composition as your main focus?
When was the shift?
Yeah, like what was the point that you felt like shifting to composition?
Mine was actually the first year of piano lessons, because I was assigned a really dippy piece for my recital. Cheesy, you might say. And I just said, I'd really like to write my own piece. And the teacher said no. And she didn't know what she was dealing with. But, so my first pieces came out of anger. And so I'll show you. But they're horrible pieces, but at least they got me started.
Well, I don't see myself as a just composer or like composition is taking over the pianist. I see myself as a musician, period. Who can compose, who can play, can improvise. Right now I'm working on a theater piece. I'm doing the sound, and I'm going to be performing live the music that I'm creating for the theater piece. So I just gave a recital with Schubert, Ravel, Debussy, and Willem Bolton. So there is this other side of me, and then premiering some contemporary works, and then having commissions from England or from the Teatro Municipal in São Paulo, it's to compose. It's like freedom. Freedom for me is like the most important thing. I want to feel free to do whatever I choose. So I don't see myself just as a composer or a pianist, just a musician.
I think I resonate with that a lot. I was composing for a while, but I never considered myself a composer, and the music that I wrote was for myself to play. And it wasn't until other people started asking me for, like, oh, I want to play that piece. And I was like, oh, really? Because I'd never written it down. Everything was just up here. So slowly I started writing the pieces down as people asked for them. And I think my big shift of where I was doing a lot more composing was in 2020, when I really, I was like, I gotta pay the bills, and other people were asking me to write music. So I sort of went into this mad composing time, and then, the more that it got out there, I started to own the title of being composer. But, before that, I never thought of myself as any one thing. And a musician is a great...
Yeah.
We were in the studio that I'd been there, we were looking at this morning these things on the wall that said like grind, execute, hustle. And I was like, that is kind of like a musician. It's a hustle. It's like, what am I going to do then next? I'm going to do some music for Spotify for the podcast, and maybe I'm going to do a concert, play the symphony. I mean, you never know. And so having it's just like the different hats and the different bios, I guess. What are you going to do next? But yeah.
When you compose, do you think about the music and write it out before trying it on the piano, or are you on the piano first before writing music out?
It depends from what I'm writing for. If I'm writing for orchestra, even for the piano, it always starts here with an idea. And then there is this playfulness of just the physicality of trying out the ideas on the piano.
How does it work for you?
For me, I mean, I feel most comfortable when I'm at the piano. And so I think a lot of things I do I'll improvise. Until I find something that I like, I'll latch onto that, like record it if I'm in my studio and save it for later, or, write it down. But it is different if I'm writing not for the piano. It does a lot more, I think, in my head. I think I've only written one piece not at the piano, which is when I wrote a piece when I was at the Standing Rock protests in North Dakota. It was like in a tent, and that was the only time I did it, just like, for my mind. And then I went home and sort of, arranged it on the piano, but.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you remember your first experience with composing a piece? What's the motivation for you to motivate a piece? Since from my experience, I have composed a piece. It's maybe for something. It's for a concert, or it's for work that some curriculum needs. So I wonder, do you really what motivates you to compose a piece? Is that some idea that motivates you to do it, or what is the motivation? When you start composing a piece.
Some of it is very practical, like money. Somebody asked Irving Berlin, when do you start the piece? He said, when I get the check. And then sometimes, like after my partner passed away, I was closing up the downstairs of the house and getting the dog back in, and this viola music came to me that it was just there, and the next thing I knew, I'd written a whole movement. It was 3 or 4 in the morning, and those things happen rarely, but they're kind of wonderful when things just come to us like that. But it could be political motivation, or financial, or I find performers very inspiring. I mean, I love writing for particular people, and I write a lot for The Voice, and I love to imagine a particular singer doing it. So for me, the more personal it is, the more successful the pieces are.
Yeah, I'm the same. There has to be this personal connection, even with things that are not personal. I got a commission from King's College in London to write something for a concert in homage to Anita Garibaldi, who was a revolutionary hero from Brazil, who worked with Garibaldi, Giuseppe Garibaldi, towards the unification of Italy, right? So, and it was for voice and string orchestra. So I started digging if there was any material, and everything, I noticed that everything that was written with Anita, it was by a man, and by a male composer, and with the perspective of this hero. So I started digging on her history, and I was moved by the circumstances of her death. She was 5 months pregnant when she went to join Giuseppe in the Cerco di Vaticano. They were all, how to say that, surrounded by the Austrian army, the Vatican army, and the French army, right? And she was dressed as a man. She fled and dressed as a man because she stayed with Garibaldi's mother and their 4 children. And she missed Giuseppe so much that she dressed as a man, and she was 5 months pregnant. She went to the barracks to meet Giuseppe, and they were surrounded, and they were fleeing these 3 armies. And she caught a fever, and she died, and she was pregnant. So to me, as a woman, that was the moment, very, very powerful moment, when someone is fighting for liberty, for freedom, for what we know today as the modern state, right, the republic. So that was the moment to have and treat Anita as a woman and a fighter for freedom. And so there was this political thing too that it speaks to me very deeply. So I have a song about Amazonia. I have a song about the murder of Marielle Franco. And on the other hand, I have this very personal song cycle called Letters to My Mother in 4 movements that I was inspired by the voice of my partner in crime, a singer with a very special timbre, to compose this song cycle. So she recorded it. And it's a deeply personal subject, right? It's mother and daughter relationship. It's my relationship with my mother. So the personal connection is always there. And of course, what inspires us is when we get commission, right? We get commission, we need to do something. So if I need to do something, I need to find a connection, because that motivates me. Because working without motivation, why? Why do you work without motivation, right? So I don't think we are in a time to ignore that any longer, the importance of motivation. What makes our eyes brighter, what makes our blood, our pores vibrate, you know, that is really important. And I think that's really feeling that can bring the best of us.
For me, I think, you know, making the transition from just performing to then composing was, I wanted to go home and preserve some of the traditional music my grandfather sang, because a lot of it gets lost. All of the music's an oral tradition. It's not written down. It's treated as something that's alive. And so it's kind of like if you write it down, it's just dead. And I was thinking, how am I going to preserve this music? You know, at first, I made some recordings of my grandfather singing, and I was like, I could try, put it in sheet music form. But then I was like, why? Then what? Put it like in a museum or something? Like, this is not really serving a purpose of giving it life. So I was like, how can I, give this music life and to continue on? So that's when I started combining it with what I knew, which was the piano, and taking some of these traditional melodies. And another thing, it just didn't fit the sheet music. There were things that he did with his voice and these ideas that you just can't cram it into the sheet music form. It just didn't. Yeah, it didn't work. So I started just taking elements of the music, stuff that made it interesting to me, and then mixing it with my own compositions. And so it started out as a preservation project that motivated me, and then it sort of turned into something else where I was composing more original music, just inspired by these other elements. But at first it was just me finding a way to save a piece of my own history.
I was wondering, for all three of you, who are your favorite composers, or which kind of compositional styles influence how you write now? Because all three of you have such distinct voices. So I just was wondering this question.
Go, Ken.
Oh, I love everybody. I mean, and it's not just classical music too. I mean, I love a lot of rock and roll. I grew up in the 60s. I decided to start going to some non-classical concerts when I lived in New York, and the first jazz concert I went to was Ella Fitzgerald.
Whoa!
And I thought, where have I been?
Uh-huh.
I listen to a lot of world music. I mean, there are more obvious people like Chopin, Debussy that I completely adore. Schumann, Schubert. I mean, there's so much that I love, and even if you don't like something, it influences you, because it helps you define who you are in opposition to something else.
Oh, God.
So all listening is very profound.
So true.
And I'm a big gardener. I'm a big dog lover. To me, it's our life. It's not just it's the piano. So it's a really good question.
Yes, and a hard one to answer.
I botched it, but go ahead.
I love everybody, really. I listen to all kinds of music, and I'm a sucker for ethnic music. So I have a collection on my computer, like especially vocal music from all kinds of cultures, from Inuit songs to all the 55, and you people correct me if I'm wrong, ethnicities of China, Japan, Middle East, everything that I can get my hands on. I'm a big fan of what they call folk music. I hate the denomination. If you want to know more about it, I recommend that you read the book, The Invention of Art, Music, and Folk Music. And you're going to see that's a 19th century invention. As is our canon, which expelled all the women composers who existed prior to the 19th century, right? Because there were so many. I hope you know that. and gave us the impression that composition is just a thing for men, right? And so it's an invention. And I digress. I completely digress. My favorite things. And of course, Brazilian music, which I highly recommend you listen to. Brazilian popular music. It's so good. Some say it's the best in the world. But I'm suspecting.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up here. I want to just say tomorrow morning we have these theme classes, and you know, a lot of your questions might be better answered by coming to the class and seeing how something develops.
Mm-hmm.
Just I mean, I don't want to make these classes mandatory, but I really feel like what's happening tomorrow is probably the most important day of this festival, because it's something that you can't and won't experience anywhere else unless maybe you come back here next year, but we can't.
Classes are going to be here?
The theme classes.
The theme classes here.
Theme, T-H-E-M,
Yeah.
yeah, in here.
Okay.
And so what's going to happen is, I mean, like some of you are asking if you have an idea. Yeah, you can work with one of them to develop this idea. So we're not going to like make, well, maybe we will make a great piece of music that will become the most popular piece for the 21st century. Who knows, who knows? But come, because it will help you open yourself, not only to composition, but to open yourself working with yourself when you're in the practice room, to make your own interpretation, because it's so important for all of you to be able to go on your own without waiting until your lesson at 3:30 on Thursday or whatever. Oh, I'm going to do what my teacher says. You're all way beyond that point. So please come tomorrow, and then we will have another short faculty forum in the afternoon where we can actually just tie things together. And you know, your individual lesson times are important, because it's not like you don't have to play Kreisleriana for the 150th time for anybody here, but you can ask questions or explore. I mean, one of the things that personally I loved about studying with Leonard Stein, who was Schoenberg's assistant for many years. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say this, but it's true. At least 50% of the time I never did what I was supposed to prepare for my lesson. But I would go anyway, and I went anyway because when I walked in there, he was always, you know, full of life and happy to see me. And if I didn't, he said, well, why don't you show me what you did or play for me, whatever. And sometimes I would say, I don't have anything. He said, oh, doesn't matter. Let's do this together. And it was like, it was wonderful, because either we would make something, compose something, or explore something, or, I mean, so that's what I'm trying to introduce, that element. So it's not like you have to have spent 300 hours or 5 hours a day, you know, preparing anything. So just come, because I think it will be a wonderful experience. Okay? Thank you all so much.